I, like many people, first came into contact with the work of Hayao Miyazaki when I was very young. I grew up the oldest in a first-generation immigrant family, with my dad being from Peru and my mom being from Germany. So, as a kid, my entertainment wasn't very Disney or Nickelodeon focused. I remember vividly a mixture of comedic skits from Mexican comedian Chespirito, this German TV show from the 70s, Divina Maya, as well as whatever South Park episode my cousin happened to be watching at the time. All copies made on VHS, of course. But through it all, there is one other vivid memory I have of all the things I watched while I was young. That of a little girl in a red dress swimming through the ocean. Ponyo is one of the earliest films I remember explicitly thinking about and enjoying. Despite this, and I will never know why, I never made an effort to seek out any other films made by Hayao Miyazaki, the director of Ponyo, or Ghibli, the studio who produced it. I'd only heard good things about these other films, but for whatever reason, never made the effort to watch them. It wasn't until the first few weeks living alone in Germany that I found Spirited Away on Netflix, and I'll just say, yeah, these are some of the best movies ever made. Every single one of them is just amazing on their own, and doing more research on Miyazaki and his life has only increased my appreciation for these genuine works of art. Hayao Miyazaki was born January 5th, 1941, to a family of 4 boys in Tokyo City. Hayao and his family grew up relatively well off compared to the rest of Japan due to the Second World War. His father, Katsuya Miyazaki, was the owner of a plane manufacturing plant that contributed to Imperial Japan's war efforts and eventually produced a lot of the planes used in kamikaze attacks. Of this, Miyazaki has stated that he feels guilty that his family profited off of the war efforts, a feeling that has no doubt influenced the themes of war present throughout his work. At the age of 4, his family had to flee the bombing of Utsunomiya, and Miyazaki's life quickly changed. Just a short while later, his mother, Yoshiko, had contracted spinal tuberculosis and spent the next few years in a hospital. Around this time, he was also given a diagnosis from a doctor that estimated he would not live past the age of 20. Despite this, Miyazaki attended school where he quickly found a passion for drawing. He would focus more on drawing planes and landscapes rather than people, and was inspired by the work of fellow Japanese illustrator Osamu Tezuka, who was best known for his work on Astro Boy. Most of his early drawing would eventually be destroyed though, as Miyazaki thought it was in bad taste that he was copying the style of another artist. It wasn't until his final year of high school that Miyazaki would watch the 1958 film Panda and the Magic Serpent, Japan's first ever feature-length animated film in color, that he decided he wanted to be an animator. He had snuck out and watched the film instead of studying for exams, but fell in love with everything it represented, especially its life-affirming message, something that he felt he was looking for in the world. Something else that affected the young Miyazaki was his relationship with his mother, who was recently returning to normal health. He and his father would bond over movies, but Miyazaki's father was a busy man, and he had stated that whenever he had questions or needed support, he would always turn to his mother. He described her as a strict and an intelligent woman, and one who questioned the societal norms around her, traits that can be found in many of the older women characters in his stories. He did not have such a relationship with his father, however, saying that he often felt negatively about him, partly out of guilt for his contribution to the war, but also because he never said or did anything lofty or inspiring. He remembers his father buying paintings and showing them off to guests, but with no further understanding or appreciation for art. After his death in 1993, Miyazaki regretted not having an honest conversation with his father, and that he felt he was more equipped to handle that conversation now than in his youth. All of this had an impact on the way Miyazaki understood the world, so in 1963, when he graduated from university with a degree in political science and economics, he was ready to start working on his art. Out of college, he was hired by Toei Animation. Yes, the same Toei Animation that did Dragon Ball, where he was able to work on various projects. Just a few years later, he was appointed as chief animator on the film Great Adventure of Horus, Prince of the Sun, where he found a lifelong collaborator and friend in the film's director, Isao Takahata. Together, the two would continue working on various projects for various studios and developing their own workflows. For Miyazaki, this meant finding the narrative as he designs the storyboards, as he often doesn't start with the entire story clear in his head. His approach to animation is also pretty traditional, as Miyazaki employs mostly hand-drawn animation and supervises every single frame of his films as well. Around this time, Miyazaki also welcomed 2 sons, Goro and Keisuke, which also changed his view on art and influenced him to make his art for his kids. Despite this, Miyazaki became too focused on his art perhaps, and didn't spend much time at home, causing a strained relationship with his children. His son Goro remembers watching his father's work to understand him, since the two rarely spoke, and Miyazaki himself said that he tried to be a good father, but in the end, I wasn't a very good parent. In 1979, he moved to Telecom Animation to direct his first feature film, Lupin III: The Castle of Cagliostro, an installment in a long-running Japanese anime franchise following the adventures of the gentleman thief, Lupin III, a film to which this day is still regarded as one of the best in the entire franchise. Following the film's success, Miyazaki proposed 2 other films to studios, both of which were rejected for not being based off of existing manga. He then shifted his focus to drawing manga and creating his own novel series, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Winds, a 7-volume adventure story that received great reviews and I'm told is much weirder than the film. Following the manga's success, Miyazaki was encouraged to turn the story into a movie, and the resulting feature was an even bigger success and cemented Miyazaki as one of the most influential animators at the time. The film was applauded for its anti-war, feminist, and environmental messages, although Miyazaki rejects these labels, claiming he only makes movies to entertain. While we're at it though, let's talk about Miyazaki's themes. Although all of his films are completely separate from each other, there are themes and messages, even an attitude towards life and art, that carry over from film to film. For example, most of Miyazaki's work has a deliberately slow pace that forces the audience to sit and enjoy the apparent mundanity of life. There is focus put on nature and the interaction between it and humanity, something no doubt influenced by Miyazaki's childhood, where he witnessed nature and a more traditional lifestyle being destroyed in the name of economic development. The balance between what we take and how we contribute to nature is put into question in his films, and the conclusion is often very bittersweet. His antagonists, if the story even has one, are usually morally complex, not creating a world of good versus evil, but instead where 2 groups with opposing interests come into conflict out of selfishness and misunderstanding. Sometimes there is war present in his stories, and as an avowed pacifist, Miyazaki uses this as a way of critiquing the ideologies that lead us to this place, or the way war interferes with people's everyday life. These themes had already begun subtly manifesting themselves in his earlier work, but nowhere would they shine like in the work he made with Studio Ghibli. In 1985, Hayao Miyazaki, Isao Takahata, as well as a few other prominent figures in the Japanese animation scene, founded Studio Ghibli, an animation production studio. For his first film under Ghibli, Hayao created Laputa, Castle in the Sky, an adventure film that was partly inspired by the mining strikes of 1984 in Wales, an event that he had personally witnessed. The following year, Ghibli went into production on 2 films simultaneously, My Neighbor Totoro, and Takahata's directing debut at Ghibli, Grave of the Fireflies. Both of the films received critical acclaim and are both, in their own right, cult films, but fell flat at the box office. Their next film, however, would be a different story. After acquiring the rights to Kiki's Delivery Service, a Japanese children's novel by author Eiko Kadona, Miyazaki had hired a director and a scriptwriter to create a 60-minute special. After some disagreements over the direction of the script, Hayao eventually became the director, and the film was released in 1989, where it was the highest-grossing movie in Japan of that year. It was around this time that the Yugoslav Wars broke out, an event that affected Miyazaki's art and created a more serious film that directly deals with war and fascism in Porco Rosso. Although the film was a critical and commercial success, and one of my personal favorites of Miyazaki's, he felt that the film was foolish to make, as it was a kid's movie and didn't allow him to fully deal with war in a way that was still comprehensible to children. Then, in 1995, Miyazaki would take a group of artists out to the forest of Yakushima, where they would spend time painting and taking pictures. These paintings, as well as some story notes Miyazaki had been working on since the 70s, are eventually what came together to make Princess Mononoke. Shortly after, he would also create Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and of course Ponyo, the 4 of which basically cemented his place as one of the most respected filmmakers and animators internationally as well. It was around this time that his son Goro Miyazaki had also begun directing films. Working at Ghibli, Goro was appointed to be the director of the film Tales from Earthsea. In response to this, Miyazaki publicly stated that he was disappointed about the decision to name his son as director, and upon seeing the film, told a member of the private screening that his son was still a child, and walked out of the film's premiere. Goro did eventually say his dad wrote him a note saying that it was made honestly, so it was good. Outside of being an animator, his reputation as a person is less than friendly. I think calling him a grumpy old man would not be inaccurate, but he also seems to be really disappointed and tough on himself and the world. stemming from his distaste for consumerism. He's talked a lot about him not being able to wait for an ecological apocalypse, like when he said, "I'd like to see Manhattan underwater. I'd like to see when the human population plummets and there are no more high-rises because nobody is buying them. I'm excited about that." He's also been highly critical of modern-day Japan, criticizing former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and expressing disappointment with the lack of apologies and acknowledgement of Japan's crimes in China and Korea. He stated that he has appreciated and been inspired by communist values, and in 2003, he refused to attend the Oscars with his film Spirited Away because he didn't want to visit a country that was bombing Iraq. In 2012, for what Miyazaki said would be his last film, he would release a biographical film about Jiro Horikoshi, an engineer who designed one of the best models of fighter planes used by Imperial Japan's navy. More so than most of his other works, this one stayed the most grounded in reality. There was no big supernatural elements, and it mainly focused on the dreams of this one man. There are a lot of interesting parallels between Jiro and Miyazaki, between being an artist and an engineer, and the relationship both of them have to their work. There are a lot of things that I want to say about this movie, but I think it's best left for a video of its own. For now, I'll just say that had this movie been his final one, I think it would have been a perfect reflection of his entire career and the films that he's made. It would have been. But then he announced that he'd be coming out of retirement for his real final movie this time, The Boy and the Heron. In reality, Miyazaki has been saying that he's going into retirement since the 90s, so honestly, I don't expect him to stop. And hopefully we continue getting more films from Miyazaki for as long as we can. Miyazaki's ability as an animator and a storyteller have influenced generations of artists to create stories more focused on nature, on a different lifestyle, and the enjoyment of the little moments in life. If you haven't seen all of his films, I highly recommend you do, and if you're interested, do some more research on his life and his philosophy. I think it only grew my appreciation for his work as an artist. Thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Peace.